Dwight D. Eisenhower, The Military-Industrial Complex. This evening I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. 3 of these involved our own country. Despite these holocausts, America is today the strongest, the most influential, and most productive nation in the world. Understandably proud of this preeminence, we yet realize that America's leadership and prestige depend not merely upon our unmatched material progress, riches, and military strength, but on how we use our power in the interests of world peace and human betterment. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known by any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Dwight D. Eisenhower, The Military-Industrial Complex. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. Another factor in maintaining balance involves the element of time. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. Such a confederation must be one of equals. The weakest must come to the conference table with the same confidence as we do, protected as we are by our moral, economic, and military strength. That table, though scarred by many past frustrations, cannot be abandoned for the certain agony of the battlefield. Disarmament, with mutual honor and confidence, is a continuing imperative. Together, we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Because this need is so sharp and apparent, I confess that I lay down my official responsibilities in this field with a definite sense of disappointment. As one who has witnessed the horror and the lingering sadness of war, as one who knows that another war could utterly destroy this civilization which has been so slowly and painfully built over thousands of years, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight. Dwight D. Eisenhower, The Military-Industrial Complex. Happily, I can say that war has been avoided. Steady progress toward our ultimate goal has been made, but so much remains to be done. As a private citizen, I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road. So in this, my last good night to you as your president, I thank you for the many opportunities you have given me for public service in war and in peace. I trust that in that service you find some things worthy. As for the rest of it, I know you will find ways to improve performance in the future. To all the peoples of the world, I once more give expression to America's prayerful and continuing aspiration. We pray that peoples of all faiths, all races, all nations may have their great human needs satisfied, that those now denied opportunity shall come to enjoy it to the full, that all who yearn for freedom may experience its spiritual blessings, that those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibilities, that all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, that the scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made to disappear from the earth, and that in the goodness of time all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed by the binding force of mutual respect and love. Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night. Prince Charles, Ugly Buildings. At last, people are beginning to see that it is possible and important in human terms to respect old buildings, street plans, and traditional scales, and at the same time, not to feel guilty about a preference for facades, ornaments, and soft materials. At last, after witnessing the wholesale destruction of Georgian and Victorian housing in most of our cities, people have begun to realize that it is possible to restore old buildings, and what is more, that there are architects willing to undertake such projects. For far too long, it seems to me, some planners and architects have consistently ignored the feelings and wishes of the mass of ordinary people in this country. Perhaps, when you think about it, it is hardly surprising, as architects tend to have been trained to design buildings from scratch, to tear down and rebuild. A large number of us have developed a feeling that architects tend to design houses for the approval of fellow architects and critics, not for the tenants. To be concerned about the way people live, about the environment they inhabit, and the kind of community that is created by that environment should surely be one of the prime requirements of a really good architect. It has been most encouraging to see the development of community architecture as a natural reaction to the policy of decanting people to new towns and overspill estates where the extended family patterns of support were destroyed and the community life was lost. Now, moreover, we are seeing the gradual expansion of housing cooperatives, particularly in the inner city areas of Liverpool, where the tenants are able to work with an architect of their own who listens to their comments and their ideas and tries to design the kind of environment they want, rather than the kind which tends to be imposed upon them without any degree of choice. What I believe is important about community architecture is that it has shown ordinary people that their views are worth having, that architects and planners do not necessarily have the monopoly of knowing best about taste, style, and planning, that they need not be made to feel guilty or ignorant if their natural preference is for the more traditional designs, for a small garden, for courtyards, arches, and porches, and that there is a growing number of architects prepared to listen and to offer imaginative ideas. It would be a tragedy if the character and skyline of our capital city were to be further ruined, and St. Paul's dwarfed by yet another giant glass stump, better suited to downtown Chicago than the city of London. It is hard to imagine that London before the last war must have had one of the most beautiful skylines of any great city, if those who recall it are to be believed. Those who do say that the affinity between buildings and the earth, in spite of the city's immense size, was so close and organic that the houses looked almost as though they had grown out of the earth and had not been imposed upon it, grown, moreover, in such a way that as few trees as possible were thrust out of the way. Those who knew it then and loved it, as so many British love Venice without concrete stumps and glass towers, and those who can imagine what it was like, must associate with the sentiments in one of Aldous Huxley's earliest and most successful novels, Antic Hay, where the main character, an unsuccessful architect, reveals a model of London as Christopher Wren wanted to rebuild it after the Great Fire, and describes how Wren was so obsessed with the opportunity the fire gave the city to rebuild itself into a greater and more glorious vision. What, then, are we doing to our capital city now? What have we done to it since the bombing during the war? What are we shortly going to do to one of its most famous areas, Trafalgar Square? Instead of designing an extension to the elegant facade of the National Gallery which complements it and continues the concept of columns and domes, it looks as if we may be presented with a kind of vast municipal fire station, complete with the sort of tower that contains the siren. I would understand better this type of high-tech approach if you demolished the whole of Trafalgar Square and started again with a single architect responsible for the entire layout. But what is proposed is like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved and elegant friend. Apart from anything else, it defeats me why anyone wishing to display the early Renaissance pictures belonging to the gallery should do so in a new gallery so manifestly at odds with the whole spirit of that age of astonishing proportion. Why can't we have those curves and arches that express feeling and design? What is wrong with them? Why has everything got to be vertical, straight, unbending, only at right angles, and functional?
Robert Runcie, after the Falklands War. Our hope as Christians is not fundamentally in man's naked goodwill and rationality. We believe that he can overcome the deadly selfishness of class or sect or race by discovering himself as a child of the universal God of love. When a man realizes that he is a beloved child of the Creator of all, then he is ready to see his neighbors in the world as brothers and sisters. That is one reason why those who dare to interpret God's will must never claim him as an asset for one nation or group rather than another. War springs from the love and loyalty which should be offered to God being applied to some God substitute, one of the most dangerous being nationalism. This is a dangerous world where evil is at work, nourishing the mindless brutality which killed and maimed so many in this city last week. Sometimes with the greatest reluctance, force is necessary to hold back the chaos which injustice and the irrational element in man threaten to make of the world. But having said that, all is not lost, and there is hope. Even in the failure of war, there are springs of hope. In that great war play by Shakespeare, Henry V says, "There is some soul of goodness in things evil, would men observingly distill it out." People are mourning on both sides of this conflict. In our prayers, we shall quite rightly remember those who are bereaved in our own country and the relations of the young Argentinian soldiers who were killed. Common sorrow should do something to reunite those who were engaged in this struggle. A shared anguish can be a bridge of reconciliation. Our neighbors are indeed like us. I have had an avalanche of letters and advice about this service. Some correspondents have asked, why drag God in? As if the intention was to wheel up God to endorse some particular policy or attitude rather than another. The purpose of prayer and of services like this is very different, and there is hope for the world in the difference. In our prayers, we come into the presence of the living God. We come with our very human emotions, pride in achievement and courage, grief at loss and waste. We come as we are, and not just mouthing opinions and thanksgiving, which the fashion of the moment judges acceptable. As we pour into prayer our mourning, our pride, our shame, and our convictions, which will inevitably differ from person to person, if we are really present and really reaching out to God and not just demanding His endorsement, then God is able to work upon us. He is able to deepen and enlarge our compassion and to purify our thanksgiving. The parent who comes mourning the loss of a son may find here consolation, but also a spirit which enlarges our compassion to include all those Argentinian parents who have lost sons.
Video designed by English7levels.com.
Robert Runcie after the Falklands War. Man without God finds it difficult to achieve this revolution inside himself. But talk of peace and reconciliation is just fanciful and theoretical unless we are prepared to undergo such a revolution. Many of the reports I have heard about the troops engaged in this war refer to moments when soldiers have been brought face to face with what is fundamental in life and have found new sources of strength and compassion even in the midst of conflict. Ironically, it has sometimes been those spectators who remained at home, whether supporters or opponents of the conflict, who continue to be most violent in their attitudes and untouched in their deepest selves. Man without God is less than man. In meeting God, a man is shown his failures and his lack of integrity, but he is also given strength to turn more and more of his life and actions into love and compassion for other men like himself. It is necessary to the continuance of life on this planet that more and more people make this discovery. We have been the choice. Man possesses the power to obliterate himself, sacrificing the whole race on the altar of some God substitute. Or he can choose life in partnership with God, the Father of all. I believe there is evidence that more and more people are waking up to the realization that this crucial decision peers us in the face here and now. Cathedrals and churches are always places into which we bring human experiences, birth, marriage, death, our flickering communion with God, our fragile relationships with each other, so that they may be deepened and directed by the Spirit of Christ. Today we bring our mixture of thanksgiving, sorrows, and aspirations for a better ordering of this world. Pray God that He may purify, enlarge, and redirect these in the ways of His kingdom of love and peace. Amen.
Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. A hot air balloon drifts slowly over a bottomless chasm carrying several passengers. A leak develops. The balloon starts losing height. The pit, a dark yawn, comes closer. Good grief, the wounded balloon can bear just one passenger to safety. The many must be sacrificed to save the one. But who should live? Who should die? And who could make such a choice? In point of fact, debating societies everywhere regularly make such choices without qualms, for of course what I've described is the given situation of that evergreen favorite, the balloon debate, in which, as the speakers argue over the relative merits and demerits of the well-known figures they have placed in disaster's mouth, the assembled company blithely accepts the faintly unpleasant idea that a human being's right to life is increased or diminished by his or her virtues or vices, that we may be born equal, but thereafter our lives weigh differently in the scales. It's only make-believe after all, and while it may not be very nice, it does reflect how people actually think. I have now spent over 1,000 days in just such a balloon, but alas, this isn't a game. For most of these 1,000 days, my fellow travelers included the Western hostages in Lebanon and the British businessmen imprisoned in Iran and Iraq, Roger Cooper and Ian Richter. And I had to accept, and did accept, that for most of my countrymen and countrywomen, my plight counted for less than the others. In any choice between us, I'd have been the first to be pitched out of the basket and into the abyss. Our lives teach us who we are, I wrote at the end of my essay, In Food Faith. Some of the lessons have been harsh and difficult to learn. Trapped inside a metaphor, I've often felt the need to redescribe it, to change the terms. This isn't so much a balloon, I've wanted to say, as a bubble, within which I'm simultaneously exposed and sealed off. The bubble floats above and through the world, depriving me of reality, reducing me to an abstraction. For many people, I've ceased to be a human being. I've become an issue, a bother, an affair. Bulletproofed bubbles like this one are reality-proof too. Those who travel in them, like those who wear Tolkien's rings of invisibility, become wraith-like if they're not careful. They get lost. In this phantom space, a man may become the bubble that encases him, and then one day, pop, he's gone forever. It's ridiculous, isn't it, to have to say, but I am a human being, unjustly accused, unjustly embubbled. Or is it I who am being ridiculous as I call out from my bubble, I'm still trapped in here, folks. Somebody, please get me out. Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. Out there where you are, in the rich and powerful and lucky West, has it really been so long since religions persecuted people, burning them as heretics, drowning them as witches, that you can't recognize religious persecution when you see it? The original metaphor has reasserted itself. I'm back in the balloon, asking for the right to live. What is my single life worth? Despair whispers in my ear. Not a lot, but I refuse to give in to despair. I refuse to give in to despair because I've been shown love as well as hatred. I know that many people do care and are appalled by the crazy upside-down logic of the post-fatwa world in which a single novelist can be accused of having savaged or mugged a whole community, becoming its tormentor instead of its tarred and feathered victim and the scapegoat for all its discontents. Many people do ask, for example, when a white pop star turned Islamic fanatic speaks approvingly about killing an Indian immigrant, how does the Indian immigrant end up being called the racist? Or again, what minority is smaller and weaker than a minority of one? I refuse to give in to despair, even though for 1,000 days and more I've been put through a degree course in worthlessness, my own personal and specific worthlessness. My first teachers were the mobs marching down distant boulevards, baying for my blood and finding soon enough their echoes on the English streets. I could not understand the force that makes parents hang murderous slogans around their children's necks. I have learned to understand it. It burns books and effigies and thinks itself holy. But at first, as I watched the marchers, I felt them trampling on my heart. Once again, however, I have been saved by instances of fair-mindedness, of goodness. Every time I learn that a reader somewhere has been touched by the satanic verses, moved and entertained and stimulated by it, it arouses deep feelings in me. And there are more and more such readers nowadays, my postbag tells me, readers, including Muslims, who are willing to give my burned, spurned child a fair hearing at long last. Sometimes I think that one day Muslims will be ashamed of what Muslims did in these times, will find the Rushdie affair as improbable as the West now finds martyr burning. One day they may agree that, as the European Enlightenment demonstrated, freedom of thought is precisely freedom from religious control, freedom from accusations of blasphemy. Maybe they'll agree, too, that the row over the satanic verses was at the bottom of an argument about who should have power over the grand narrative, the story of Islam, and that power must belong equally to everyone. That even if my novel were incompetent, its attempt to retell the story would still be important. That if I failed, others must succeed, because those who do not have power over the story that dominates their lives, power to retell it, rethink it, deconstruct it, joke about it, and change it as times change, truly are powerless, because they cannot think new thoughts. Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. One day, maybe, but not today. Today, my education in worthlessness continues. And what Saul Bellow would call my reality instructors include the media pundit who suggests that a manly death would be better for me than hiding like a rat. The letter writer who points out that of course the trouble is that I look like the devil and wonders if I have hairy shanks and cloven hooves. The moderate Muslim who writes to say that Muslims find it revolting when I speak about the Iranian death threats. It's not the fatwa that's revolting, you understand, but my mention of it. The rather more immoderate Muslim who tells me to shut up, explaining that if a fly is caught in a spider's web, it should not attract the attention of the spider. I ask the reader to imagine how it might feel to be intellectually and emotionally bludgeoned from 1,000 different directions every day for 1,000 days and more. Back in the balloon, something longed for and heartening has happened. On this occasion, mirabile dictu, the many have not been sacrificed, but saved. That is to say, my companions, the Western hostages and the gold businessmen, have, by good fortune and the efforts of others, managed to descend safely to earth, and have been reunited with their families and friends, with their own free lives. I rejoice for them, and admire their courage, their resilience, and now I'm alone in the balloon. Surely I'll be safe now. Surely now the balloon will drop safely towards some nearby haven, and I too will be reunited with my life. Surely it's my turn now. But the balloon is over the chasm again, and it's still sinking. I realize that it's carrying a great deal of valuable freight, trading relations, armaments deals, the balance of power in the Gulf. These and other matters of great moment are weighing down the balloon. I hear voices suggesting that if I stay aboard, this precious cargo will be endangered. The national interest is being redefined. Am I being redefined out of it? Am I to be jettisoned after all? When Britain renewed relations with Iran at the United Nations in 1990, the senior British official in charge of the negotiations assured me in unambiguous language that something very substantial had been achieved on my behalf. The Iranians, laughing merrily, had secretly agreed to forget the fatwa. The diplomat put great stress on this cherry Iranian laughter. They would neither encourage nor allow their citizens, surrogates, or proxies to act against me. Oh, how I wanted to believe that. But in the year and a bit that followed, we saw the fatwa restated in Iran. The bounty money doubled. The book's Italian translator severely wounded. Its Japanese translator stabbed to death. There was news of an attempt to find and kill me by contract killers, working directly for the Iranian government through its European embassies. Another such contract was successfully carried out in Paris, the victim being the harmless and aged ex-Prime Minister of Iran, Shapur Bakhtiar. Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. It seems reasonable to deduce that the secret deal made at the United Nations hasn't worked. Dismayingly, however, the talk as I write is all of improving relations with Iran still further, while the Rushdie case is described as a side issue. Is this a balloon I'm in, or the dustbin of history? Let me be clear, there is nothing I can do to break this impasse. The fatwa was politically motivated to begin with. It remains a breach of international law, and it can only be solved at the political level. To effect the release of the Western hostages in Lebanon, great levers were moved, great forces were brought into play. For Mr. Richter, 70 million in frozen Iraqi assets were thawed. What then is a novelist under terrorist attack worth? Despair murmurs once again, not a plug nickel. But I refuse to give in to despair. You may ask why I'm so sure there's nothing I can do to help myself out of this jam. At the end of 1990, dispirited and demoralized, feeling abandoned even then in consequence of the British government's decision to patch things up with Iran, and with my marriage at an end, I faced my deepest grief, my unquenchable sorrow at having been torn away from, cast out of, the cultures and societies from which I'd always drawn my strength and inspiration, that is, the broad community of British Asians and the broader community of Indian Muslims. I determined to make my peace with Islam, even at the cost of my pride. Those who were surprised and displeased by what I did perhaps failed to see that I was not some deracinated Uncle Tom Wog. To these people it was apparently incomprehensible that I should seek to make peace between the warring halves of the world, which were also the warring halves of my soul, and that I should seek to do so in a spirit of humility, instead of the arrogance so often attributed to me. In good faith, I wrote, perhaps a way forward might be found through the mutual recognition of our mutual pain. But even moderate Muslims had trouble with this notion. What pain, they asked, could I possibly have suffered? What was I talking about? As a result, the really important conversations I had in this period were with myself. I said, Salman, you must send a message loud enough to be heard all over the world. You must make ordinary Muslims see that you aren't their enemy, and make the West understand a little more of the complexity of Muslim culture. It was my hope that Westerners might say, well, if he's the one in danger and yet he's willing to acknowledge the importance of his Muslim roots, then perhaps we ought to start thinking a little less stereotypically ourselves. No such luck, though. The message you send isn't always the one that's received. Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. And I said to myself, admit it, Salman, the story of Islam has a deeper meaning for you than any of the other grand narratives. Of course, you're no mystic, mister, and when you wrote, I am not a Muslim, that's what you meant. No supernaturalism, no literalist orthodoxies, no formal rules for you. But Islam doesn't have to mean blind faith. It can mean blind faith. It can mean what it always meant in your family, a culture, a civilization, as open-minded as your grandfather was, as delightedly disputatious as your father was, as intellectual and philosophical as you like. Don't let zealots make Muslim a terrifying word, I urged myself. Remember what it meant, family and light. I reminded myself that I had always argued that it was necessary to develop the nascent concept of the secular Muslim, who, like the secular Jews, affirmed his membership of the culture while being separate from the theology. I had recently read the contemporary Muslim philosopher Fuad Zakaria's Laïcité ou Islamisme, and have been encouraged by Zakaria's attempt to modernize Islamic thought. But Salman, I told myself, you can't argue from outside the debating chamber. You've got to cross the threshold, go inside the room, and then fight for your humanized, historicized, secularized way of being a Muslim. I recalled my near namesake, the 12th century philosopher Ibn Rushd Averroes, who argued that, to quote the great Arab historian Albert Hourani, not all the words of the Quran should be taken literally. When the literal meaning of Quranic verses appeared to contradict the truths to which philosophers arrived by the exercise of reason, those verses needed to be interpreted metaphorically. But Ibn Rushd was a snob. Having pronounced an idea far in advance of its time, he qualified it by saying that such sophistication was only suitable for the elite. Literalism would do for the masses. Salman, I asked myself, is it time to pick up Ibn Rushd's banner and carry it forward? To say nowadays, such ideas are fit for everybody, for the beggar as well as the prince. It was with such things in mind, and with my thoughts in a state of some confusion and torment, that I spoke the Muslim creed before witnesses. But my fantasy of joining the fight for the modernization of Muslim thought, for freedom from the shackles of the thought police, was stillborn. It never really had a chance. Too many people had spent too long demonizing and totemizing me to listen seriously to what I had to say. In the West, some friends turned against me, called me by yet another set of insulting names. Now I was spineless, pathetic, debased. I had betrayed myself, my cause. Above all, I had betrayed them. I also found myself up against the granite, heartless certainties of actually existing Islam, by which I mean the political and priestly power structure that presently dominates and stifles Muslim societies. Actually existing Islam has failed to create a free society anywhere on earth, and it wasn't about to let me, of all people, argue in favor of one. Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. Suddenly I was, metaphorically, among people whose social attitudes I'd fought for all my life. For example, their attitudes about women. One Islamicist boasted to me that his wife would cut his toenails while he made telephone calls, and suggested I find such a spouse. Or about gays. One of the imams I met in December 1990 was on TV soon afterwards denouncing Muslim gays as sick creatures who brought shame on their families and who ought to seek medical and psychiatric help. Had I truly fallen in among such people? That was not what I meant at all. Facing the intransigence, the Philistine scorn of so much of actually existing Islam, I reluctantly concluded that there was no way for me to help bring into the Muslim culture I dreamed of the progressive, irreverent, skeptical, argumentative, playful, and unafraid culture, which is what I've always understood as freedom. Not me, not in this lifetime, no chance. Actually existing Islam, which has all but deified its prophet, a man who always fought passionately against such deification, which has supplanted a priest-free religion by a priest-ridden one, which makes literalism a weapon and redescriptions a crime, which will never let the likes of me in. Ibn Rushd's ideas were silenced in their time, and throughout the Muslim world today, progressive ideas are in retreat. Actually existing Islam reigns supreme, and just as the recently destroyed actually existing socialism of the Soviet terror state was horrifically unlike the utopia of peace and equality of which democratic socialists have dreamed, so also is actually existing Islam a force to which I have never given in, to which I cannot submit. There is a point beyond which conciliation looks like capitulation. I do not believe I passed the point, but others have thought otherwise. I have never disowned my book, nor regretted writing it. I said I was sorry to have offended people because I had not set out to do so, and so I am. I explained that writers do not agree with every word spoken by every character they create, a truism in the world of books, but a continuing mystery to the Satanic Verse's opponents. I have always said that this novel has been traduced. Indeed, the chief benefit of my meeting with the 6 Islamic scholars on Christmas Eve 1990 was that they agreed that the novel had no insulting motives. In Islam, it is a man's intention that counts, I was told. Now we will launch a worldwide campaign on your behalf to explain that there has been a great mistake. All this with much smiling and friendliness and handshaking. It was in this context that I agreed to suspend, not cancel, a paperback edition, to create what I called a space for reconciliation. Salman Rushdie, Life Under Threat. Alas, I overestimated these men. Within days, all but one of them had broken their promises and recommended to vilify me and my work as if we had not shaken hands. I felt most probably I had been a great fool. The suspension of the paperback began at once to look like surrender. In the aftermath of the attacks on my translators, it looks even more craven. It has now been more than 3 years since the Satanic Verses was published. That's a long, long space for reconciliation. Long enough. I accept that I was wrong to have given way on this point. The Satanic Verses must be freely available and easily affordable, if only because if it is not read and studied, then these years will have no meaning. Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. Our lives teach us who we are. I have learned the hard way that when you permit anyone else's description of reality to supplant your own, and such descriptions have been raining down on me from security advisors, governments, journalists, archbishops, friends, enemies, mullahs, then you might as well be dead. Obviously, a rigid, blinkered, absolutist worldview is the easiest to keep hold of, whereas the fluid, uncertain, metamorphic picture I've always carried about is rather more vulnerable. Yet I must cling with all my might to that chameleon, that chimera, that space shifter, my own soul. Must hold on to its mischievous, iconoclastic, out-of-step clown instincts, no matter how great the storm. And if that plunges me into contradiction and paradox, so be it. I've lived in that messy ocean all my life. I fished in it for my art. This turbulent sea was the sea outside my bedroom window in Bombay. It is the sea by which I was born, and which I carry within me wherever I go. Free speech is a non-starter, says one of my Islamic extremist opponents. No, sir, it's not. Free speech is the whole thing, the whole ballgame. Free speech is life itself. That's the end of my speech from this ailing balloon. Now it's time to answer the question, what is my single life worth? Is it worth more or less than the fat contracts and political treaties that are in here with me? Is it worth more or less than good relations with a country which in April 1991 gave 800 women 74 lashes each for not wearing a veil, in which the 80-year-old writer Mariam Perus is still in gaol and has been tortured, and whose foreign minister says, in response to criticism of his country's lamentable human rights record, international monitoring of the human rights situation in Iran should not continue indefinitely. Iran could not tolerate such monitoring for long. You must decide what you think a friend is worth to his friends, what you think a son is worth to his mother, or a father to his son. You must decide what a man's conscience and heart and soul are worth. You must decide what you think a writer is worth, what value you place on a maker of stories and an arguer with the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the balloon is sinking into the abyss. Pope John Paul II, The Defense of Poland. Our Lady of Jasna Gora is the teacher of true love for all, and this is particularly important for you, dear young people. In you, in fact, is decided that form of love which all of your life will have, and through you, human life on Polish soil. The matrimonial, family, social, and national form, but also the priestly, religious, and missionary one. Every life is determined and evaluated by the interior form of love. Tell me what you love, and I will tell you who you are. I watch. How beautiful it is that this word is found in the call of Jasna Gora. It possesses a profound evangelical ancestry. Christ says many times, watch, Matthew 26:41. Perhaps also from the gospel it passed into the tradition of scouring. In the call of Jasna Gora, it is the essential element of the reply that we wish to give to the love by which we are surrounded in the sign of the sacred icon. The response to this love must be precisely the fact that I watch. What does it mean, I watch? It means that I make an effort to be a person with a conscience. I do not stifle this conscience, and I do not deform it. I call good and evil by name, and I do not blur them. I develop in myself what is good, and I seek to correct what is evil by overcoming it in myself. This is a fundamental problem which can never be minimized or put on a secondary level. No, it is everywhere, and always a matter of the first importance. Its importance is all the greater in proportion to the increase of circumstances which seem to favor our tolerance of evil, and the fact that we easily excuse ourselves from this, especially if adults do so. My dear friends, it is up to you to put up a firm barrier against immorality, a barrier, I say, to those social vices which I will not here call by name, but which you yourselves are perfectly aware of. You must demand this of yourselves, even if others do not demand it of you. Historical experiences tell us how much the immorality of certain periods cost the whole nation. Today, when we are fighting for the future form of our social life, remember that this form depends on what people will be like. Therefore, watch. Christ said to the apostles during his prayer in Gethsemane, "Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation." Matthew 26:41. I watch also means I see another. I do not close in on myself, in a narrow search for my own interests, my own judgments. I watch means love of neighbor. It means fundamental, interhuman solidarity. Before the mother of Jasna Gora, I wish to give thanks for all the proofs of this solidarity which have been given by my compatriots, including Polish youth, in the difficult period of not many months ago. It would be difficult for me to enumerate here all the forms of this solicitude which surrounded those who were interned, imprisoned, dismissed from work, and also their families. You know this better than I. I received only sporadic news about it. Pope John Paul II, The Defense of Poland. May this good thing, which appeared in so many places and so many ways, never cease on Polish soil. May there be a constant confirmation of that I watch of the call of Jasna Gora, which is a response to the presence of the Mother of Christ in the great family of the Poles. I watch also means I feel responsible for this great common inheritance whose name is Poland. This name defines us all. This name obliges us all. This name costs us all. Perhaps at times we envy the French, the Germans, or the Americans because their name is not tied to such a historical price and because they are so easily free, while our Polish freedom costs so much. My dear ones, I will not make a comparative analysis. I will only say that it is what costs that constitutes value. It is not in fact possible to be truly free without an honest and profound relationship with values. We do not want a Poland which costs us nothing. We watch instead beside all that makes up the authentic inheritance of the generations, seeking to enrich it. A nation then is first of all rich in its people, rich in man, rich in youth, rich in every individual who watches in the name of truth. It is truth, in fact, that gives form to love. My dear young friends, before our common mother and the queen of our hearts, I desire finally to say to you that she knows your sufferings, your difficult youth, your sense of injustice and humiliation, the lack of prospects for the future that is so often felt, perhaps the temptations to flee to some other world. Even if I am not among you every day, as was the case for many years in the past, nevertheless I carry in my heart a great solicitude, a great enormous solicitude, a solicitude for you, precisely because on you depends tomorrow. I pray for you every day. It is good that we are here together at the hour of the call of Jasna, in the midst of the trials of the present time, in the midst of the trial through which your generation is passing. This call of the millennium continues to be a program. In it is contained a fundamental way out, because the way out in whatever dimension, economic, social, political, must happen first in man. Man cannot remain with no way out. Mother of Jasna, you who have been given to us by providence for the defense of the Polish nation, accept this evening this call of the Polish youth, together with the Polish Pope, and help us to persevere in hope. Amen. Richard Nixon, Farewell Speech. You are here to say goodbye to us, and we don't have a good word for it in English. The best is au revoir. We will see you again. Sure, we have done some things wrong in this administration, and the top man always takes the responsibility, and I have never ducked it. But I want to say one thing. We can be proud of it. 5.5 years. No man or no woman came into this administration and left it with more of this world's goods than when he came in. No man or no woman ever profited at the public expense or the public till. That tells something about you. Mistakes, yes, but for personal gain, never. You did what you believed in. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong. And I only wish that I were a wealthy man at the present time. I have got to find a way to pay my taxes, and if I were, I would like to recompense you for the sacrifices that all of you have made to serve in government. But you are getting something in government, and I want you to tell this to your children, and I hope the nation's children will hear it too. Something in government service that is far more important than money. It is a cause bigger than yourself. It is the cause of making this the greatest nation in the world, the leader of the world, because without our leadership, the world will know nothing but war, possibly starvation, or worse in the years ahead. With our leadership, it will know peace. It will know plenty. We think sometimes when things happen that don't go the right way, we think that when you don't pass the bar exam the first time, I happened to, but I was just lucky. I mean, my writing was so poor, the bar examiner said, "We have just got to let the guy through." We think that when someone dear to us dies, we think that when we lose an election, we think that when we suffer a defeat, that all is ended. Not true. It is only a beginning, always. The young must know it. The old must know it. It must always sustain us, because the greatness comes not when things go always good for you, but the greatness comes, and you are really tested, when you take some knocks, some disappointments, when sadness comes. Because only if you have been in the deepest valley can you ever know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain.
Tony Benn, The Importance of Democracy. Some people genuinely believe that we shall never get social justice from the British government, but we shall get it from Jacques Delors. They believe that a good king is better than a bad parliament. I have never taken that view. Others believe that the change is inevitable and that the common currency will protect us from inflation and will provide a wage policy. They believe that it will control speculation and that Britain cannot survive alone. None of those arguments persuade me because the argument has never been about sovereignty. I do not know what a sovereign is, apart from the one that used to be in gold and the Pope who is sovereign in the Vatican. We are talking about democracy. No nation, not even the great United States, which could, for all I know, be destroyed by a nuclear weapon from a third world country, has the power to impose its will on other countries. We are discussing whether the British people are to be allowed to elect those who make the laws under which they are governed. The argument is nothing to do with whether we should get more maternity leave from Madame Papandreou than from Madame Thatcher. That is not the issue. I recognize that when the members of the three front benches agree, I am in a minority. My next job, therefore, is to explain to the people of Chesterfield what we have decided. I will say first, my dear constituents, in future you will be governed by people whom you do not elect and cannot remove. I am sorry about it. They may give you better creches and shorter working hours, but you cannot remove them. I know that it sounds negative, but I have always thought it is positive to say that the important thing about democracy is that we can remove without bloodshed the people who govern us. We can get rid of a Callahan, a Wilson, or even a Right Honourable Lady by internal processes. We can get rid of a Right Honourable member for Huntington, Mr. Major. But that cannot be done in the structure that it is proposed. Even if one likes the policies of the people in Europe, one cannot get rid of them. Secondly, we say to my favorite friends, the Chartists and suffragettes, all your struggles to get control of the ballot box were a waste of time. We shall be run in future by a few white persons, as in 1832. The instrument, I might add, is the royal prerogative of treaty making. For the first time since 1649, the Crown makes the laws, advised, I admit, by the Prime Minister. We must ask what will happen when people realize what we have done. We have had a marvelous debate about Europe, but none of us has discussed our relationship with the people who sent us here. Honourable members have expressed views on Albania and the Baltic states. I have been dazzled by the knowledge of the continent of which we are all part. No one has spoken about how he or she got here and what we were sent here to do. Tony Benn, The Importance of Democracy. If people lose the power to sack their government, one of several things happens. First, people may just slope off. Apathy could destroy democracy. When the turnout drops below 50%, we are in danger. The second thing that people can do is to riot. Riot is an old-fashioned method for drawing the attention of the government to what is wrong. It is difficult for an elected person to admit it, but the riot at Strangeways produced some prison reforms. Riot has historically played a much larger part in British politics than we are ever allowed to know. Thirdly, nationalism can arise. Instead of blaming the Treaty of Rome, people say it is those Germans or it is the French. Nationalism is built out of frustration that people feel when they cannot get their way through the ballot box. With nationalism comes repression. I hope that it is not pessimistic. In my view, it is not, to say that democracy hangs by a thread in every country of the world. Unless we can offer people a peaceful route to the resolution of injustices through the ballot box, they will not listen to a House that has blocked off that route. There are many alternatives open to us. One honourable member said that he was young and had not fought in the war. He looked at a new Europe. But there have been 5 Europes this century. There was one run by the King, the Kaiser, and the Tsar. They were all cousins, so that was very comfortable. They were all Queen Victoria's grandsons. And there was no nonsense about human rights when Queen Victoria's grandsons repressed people. Then there was the Russian Revolution. Then there was the interwar period. Then there was the Anglo-Soviet alliance. Then there was the Cold War. Now we have a Boris Yeltsin who has joined the Monday Club. There have been so many Europes. This is not the only Europe on offer. I understand that my honourable friend, the member for Sunderland South, Mr. Muleary, is a Democratic Federalist, as is my honourable friend, the member for Derbyshire North East, Mr. Barnes. They want an American-type constitution for Europe. It could be that our laws would hang on which way the Albanian members voted. I could not complain about that because that is democracy. However, it is unworkable. It is like trying to get an elephant to dance through a minefield. But it would be democratic. Tony Benn, The Importance of Democracy. Another way would be to have a looser, wider Europe. I have an idea for a Commonwealth of Europe. I am introducing a bill on the subject. Europe would be rather like the British Commonwealth. We would work by consent with people. Or we could accept this ghastly proposal, which is clumsy, secretive, centralized, bureaucratic, and divisive. That is how I regard the Treaty of Rome. I was born a European, and I will die one, but I have never put my alliance behind the Treaty of Rome. I object to it. I hate being called an anti-European. How can one be anti-European when one is born in Europe? It is like saying that one is anti-British if one does not agree with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. What a lot of nonsense it is. I ask myself why the House is ready to contemplate abandoning its duties, as I fear that it is. I was elected 41 years ago this month. This chamber has lost confidence in democracy. It believes that it must be governed by someone else. It is afraid to use the powers entrusted to it by its constituents. It has traded power for status. One gets asked to go on the telly if one is Member of Parliament. The chamber does not want to use its power. It has accepted the role of a spectator and joined what Bagho called the dignified part of the Constitution, leaving the crown under the control of the Prime Minister to be the executive part. If democracy is destroyed in Britain, it will not be the communists, Trotskyists, or subversives, but this House which threw it away. The rights that are entrusted to us are not for us to give away. Even if I agree with everything that is proposed, I cannot hand away powers lent to me for 5 years by the people of Chesterfield. I just could not do it. It would be theft of public rights. Therefore, there is only one answer. If people are determined to submit themselves to Jacques Delors, Madame Papandreou, and the Council of Ministers, we must tell the people what is planned. If people vote for that, they will have all capitulated. Julius Caesar said, "We are just merging our sovereignty." So did William the Conqueror. It is not possible to support the government's motion. I have told the chief whip that I cannot support the Labour motion. I invite the House to vote against the government's motion and not to support a motion which purports to take us faster into a community which cannot reflect the aspirations of those who put us here. That is not a nationalist argument, nor is it about sovereignty. It is a democratic argument, and it should be decisive in a democratic chamber.
Sir Geoffrey Howe, resignation speech. As long ago as 1962, it was Lord Stockton, formerly Harold Macmillan, who first put the central point clearly. He argued that we had to place and keep ourselves within the community. He saw it as essential, then, as it is today, not to cut ourselves off from the realities of power, not to retreat into a ghetto of sentimentality about our past, and so diminish our control over our own destiny in the future. The pity is that the Macmillan view had not been perceived more clearly a decade before in the 50s. It would have spared so many of the struggles of the past 20 years had we been in the community from the outset, had we been ready, in the much too simple phrase, to surrender some sovereignty at a much earlier stage. Had we been in from the start, we should have had more, not less, influence over the Europe in which we live today. We should never forget the lesson of that isolation, of being on the outside looking in for the conduct of today's affairs. We have done best when we have seen the community not as a static entity to be resisted and contained, but as an active process which we can shape often decisively, provided we allow ourselves to be fully engaged in it with confidence and enthusiasm and in good faith. We must at all costs avoid presenting ourselves yet again with an oversimplified choice, a false antithesis, a bogus dilemma between one alternative starkly labeled cooperation between independent sovereign states and a second, equally crudely labeled alternative, a centralized federal superstate, as if there were no middle way in between. We commit a serious error if we think always in terms of surrendering sovereignty and seek to stand pat for all time on a given deal by proclaiming, as the Prime Minister did 2 weeks ago, that we have surrendered enough. The European enterprise is not and should not be seen like that, as some kind of zero-sum game. Sir Winston Churchill put it much more positively 40 years ago when he said, "Is it not possible, and not less agreeable, to regard this sacrifice or merger of national sovereignty as the gradual assumption by all the nations concerned of that larger sovereignty which can alone protect their diverse and distinctive customs and characteristics and their national traditions?" I find Winston Churchill's perception a good deal more convincing and encouraging for the interests of our nation than the nightmare image sometimes conjured up by the Prime Minister, who sometimes seems to look out on a continent that is positively teeming with ill-intentioned people, scheming, in her words, to extinguish democracy, to dissolve our national identity, to lead us through the back door into a federal Europe. Sir Geoffrey Howe, resignation speech. What kind of vision is that for our business people who trade there each day, for our financiers who seek to make London the money capital of Europe, or for all the young people of today? These concerns are especially important as we approach the crucially important topic of EMU. We must be positively and centrally involved in this debate and not fearfully and negatively detached. The cost of disengagement here could be very serious indeed. The tragedy is, and it is for me personally, for my party, for our whole people, for the Prime Minister herself, a very real tragedy, that the Prime Minister's perceived attitude towards Europe is running increasingly serious risks for the future of our nation. It risks minimizing our influence and maximizing our chances of being once again shut out. We have paid heavily in the past for late stars and squandered opportunities in Europe. We dare not let that happen again. If we detach ourselves completely as a party or as a nation from the middle ground of Europe, the effects will be incalculable and very hard ever to correct. In my letter of resignation, which I tendered with the utmost sadness and dismay, I said that cabinet government is about trying to persuade one another from within. That was my commitment to government by persuasion, persuading colleagues and nation. I have tried to do that as Foreign Secretary and since, but realize now that the task has become futile, of trying to stretch the meaning of words beyond what was credible, of trying to pretend there was a common policy when every step forward risked being subverted by some casual comment or impulsive answer. The conflict of loyalty is loyalty to the Prime Minister, and after more than 2 decades together, that instinct of loyalty is still very real, and the loyalty to what I perceive to be the true interests of this nation. That conflict of loyalty has become all too great. I no longer believe it is possible to resolve that conflict from within this government. That is why I have resigned. In doing so, I have done what I believe to be right for my party and my country. The time has come for others to consider their response to the tragic conflict of loyalty with which I have wrestled myself for perhaps too long.
Video designed by English7levels.com.
Mario Cuomo. 10 days ago, President Reagan admitted that although some people in this country seem to be doing well nowadays, others were unhappy and even worried about themselves, their families, and their futures. The president said he didn't understand that fear. He said,
"Why, this country is a shining city on a hill."
The president is right. In many ways, we are a shining city on a hill. But the hard truth is that not everyone is sharing in this city's splendor and glory. A shining city is perhaps all the president sees from the portico of the White House and the veranda of his ranch, where everyone seems to be doing well. But there's another part of the city, the part where some people can't pay their mortgages and most young people can't afford one, where students can't afford the education they need, and middle-class parents watch the dreams they hold for their children evaporate. In this part of the city, there are more poor than ever, more families in trouble, more and more people who need help but can't find it. Even worse, there are elderly people who tremble in the basements of the houses there. There are people who sleep in the city streets, in the gutter, where the glitter doesn't show. There are ghettos where thousands of young people, without an education or a job, give their lives away to drug dealers every day. There is despair, Mr. President, in faces you never see, in the places you never visit in your shining city. In fact, Mr. President, this nation is more a tale of 2 cities than it is a shining city on a hill. Maybe if you visited more places, Mr. President, you'd understand. Mario Cuomo. Maybe if you went to Appalachia, where some people still live in sheds, and to Lackawanna, where thousands of unemployed steelworkers wonder why we subsidized foreign steel while we surrendered their dignity to unemployment and to welfare checks. Maybe if you stepped into a shelter in Chicago and talked with some of the homeless there.
Maybe, Mr. President, if you asked a woman who'd been denied the help she needs to feed her children because you say we need the money to give a tax break to a millionaire or to build a missile we can't even afford to use.
Maybe then you'd understand. Maybe, Mr. President, but I'm afraid not. Because the truth is, this is how we were warned it would be. President Reagan told us from the beginning that he believed in a kind of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. Government can't do everything, we were told, so it should settle for taking care of the strong and hope that economic ambition and charity will do the rest. Make the rich richer, and what falls from their table will be enough for the middle class and those trying to make it into the middle class. The Republicans called it trickle-down when Hoover tried it. Now they call it supply side. It is the same shining city for those relative few who are lucky enough to live in its good neighborhoods. But for the people who are excluded, locked out, all they can do is stare from a distance at that city's glimmering towers. It's an old story, as old as our history. The difference between Democrats and the Republicans has always been measured in courage and confidence. The Republicans believe the wagon train will not make it to the frontier unless some of our old, some of our young, and some of our weak are left behind by the side of the trail. The strong will inherit the land. We Democrats believe that we can make it all the way with the whole family intact. We have, more than once. Ever since Franklin Roosevelt lifted himself from his wheelchair to lift this nation from its knees, wagon train after wagon train. Mario Cuomo. To new frontiers of education, housing, peace, the whole family aboard, constantly reaching out to extend and enlarge that family, lifting them up into the wagon on the way. Blacks and Hispanics, people of every ethnic group, and Native Americans, all those struggling to build their families and claim some small share of America. For nearly 50 years, we carried them to new levels of comfort, security, dignity, even affluence. Some of us are in this room today only because this nation had that confidence. It would be wrong to forget that. So we are here at this convention to remind ourselves where we come from and to claim the future for ourselves and for our children. Today, our great Democratic Party, which has saved this nation from depression, from fascism, from racism, from corruption, is called upon to do it again. This time to save the nation from confusion and division, from the threat of eventual fiscal disaster, and most of all from a fear of a nuclear holocaust. We must win this case on the merits. We must get the American public to look past the glitter, beyond the showmanship, to reality, to the hard substance of things. And we will do that not so much with speeches that sound good, as with speeches that are good and sound. We must make the American people hear our tale of two cities. We must convince them that we don't have to settle for two cities, that we can have one city, indivisible, shining for all its people. To succeed, we will have to surrender small parts of our individual interests, to build a platform we can all stand on, at once, comfortably, proudly singing out the truth for the nation to hear, in chorus, its logic so clear and commanding that no slick commercial, no amount of geniality, no martial music will be able to muffle it. We Democrats must unite so that the entire nation can. Surely the Republicans won't bring the convention together. Their policies divide the nation into the lucky and the left out, the royalty and the rabble. The Republicans are willing to treat that division as victory. They would cut this nation in half, into those temporarily better off and those worse off than before, and call it recovery. We should not be embarrassed or dismayed if the process of unifying is difficult, even at times wrenching. Unlike any other party, we embrace men and women of every color, every creed, every orientation, every economic class. In our family are gathered everyone from the abject poor of Essex County in New York to the enlightened affluent of the Gold Coast of both ends of our nation. And in between is the heart of our constituency, the middle class, the people not rich enough to be worry-free, but not poor enough to be on welfare. Those who work for a living because they have to. White collar and blue collar. Young professionals, men and women in small business desperate for the capital and contracts they need to prove their worth. We speak for the minorities who have not yet entered the mainstream. For ethnics who want to add their culture to the mosaic that is America. For women, indignant that we refuse to etch into our governmental commandments the simple rule, "Thou shalt not sin against equality." A commandment so obvious it can be spelled in 3 letters, ERA. For young people demanding an education and a future. For senior citizens terrorized by the idea that their only security, their social security, is being threatened. For millions of reasoning people fighting to preserve the environment from greed and stupidity, and fighting to preserve our very existence from a macho intransigence that refuses to make intelligent attempts to discuss the possibility of nuclear holocaust with our enemy. Refusing because they believe we can pile missiles so high that they will pierce the clouds and the sight of them will frighten our enemies into submission. That struggle to live with dignity is the real story of the shining city. It's a story I didn't read in a book or learn in a classroom. I saw it and lived it like many of you. I watched a small man with thick calluses on both hands work 15 and 16 hours a day. I saw him once literally bleed from the bottoms of his feet, a man who came here uneducated, alone, unable to speak the language, who taught me all I needed to know about faith and hard work by the simple eloquence of his example. Mario Cuomo. I learned about our kind of democracy from my father. I learned about our obligation to each other from him and from my mother. They asked only for a chance to work and to make the world better for their children and to be protected in those moments when they would not be able to protect themselves. This nation and its government did that for them. And that they were able to build a family and live in dignity and see one of their children go from beyond their little grocery store on the other side of the tracks in South Jamaica where he was born to occupy the highest seat in the greatest state of the greatest nation in the world we know is an ineffably beautiful tribute to the democratic process. We Democrats still have a dream. We still believe in this nation's future. And this is our answer, our credo. We believe in only the government we need, but we insist on all the government we need. We believe in a government characterized by fairness and reasonableness, a reasonableness that goes beyond labels, that doesn't distort or promise to do what it knows it can't do. A government strong enough to use the words love and compassion, and smart enough to convert our noblest aspirations into practical realities. We believe in encouraging the talented, but we believe that while survival of the fittest may be a good working description of the process of evolution, a government of humans should elevate itself to a higher order, one which fills the gaps left by a chance or a wisdom we don't understand. We would rather have laws written by the patron of this great city, the man called the world's most sincere Democrat, St. Francis of Assisi, than laws written by Darwin. We believe, as Democrats, that a society as blessed as ours, the most affluent democracy in the world's history that can spend trillions on instruments of destruction, ought to be able to help the middle class in its struggle, ought to be able to find work for all who can do it, room at the table, shelter for the homeless, care for the elderly and infirm, hope for the destitute. We proclaim as loudly as we can the utter insanity of nuclear proliferation and the need for a nuclear freeze, if only to affirm the simple truth that peace is better than war because life is better than death. Mario Cuomo. We believe in firm but fair law and order, in the union movement, in privacy for people, openness by government, civil rights and human rights. We believe in a single fundamental idea that describes better than most textbooks and any speech what a proper government should be. The idea of family, mutuality, the sharing of benefits and burdens for the good of all, feeling one another's pain, sharing one another's blessings, reasonably, honestly, fairly, without respect to race or sex or geography or political affiliation. We believe we must be the family of America, recognizing that at the heart of the matter we are bound one to another, that the problems of a retired school teacher in Duluth are our problems, that the future of the child in Buffalo is our future. The struggle of a disabled man in Boston to survive, to live decently, is our struggle. The hunger of a woman in Little Rock, our hunger. The failure anywhere to provide what reasonably we might to avoid pain is our failure. For 50 years, we Democrats created a better future for our children, using traditional democratic principles as a fixed beacon, giving us direction and purpose, but constantly innovating, adapting to new realities. Roosevelt's alphabet programs, Truman's NATO and the GI Bill of Rights, Kennedy's intelligent tax incentives and the Alliance for Progress, Johnson's civil rights, Carter's human rights, and the nearly miraculous Camp David peace accord. We will have America's first woman vice president, the child of immigrants, a New Yorker, opening with one magnificent stroke a whole new frontier for the United States. It will happen if we make it happen. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, for the good of all of us, for the love of this great nation, for the family of America, for the love of God, please make this nation remember how futures are built.
King Edward VIII. At long last, I am able to say a few words of my own. I have never wanted to withhold anything, but until now, it has not been constitutionally possible for me to speak. A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor, and now that I have been succeeded by my brother, the Duke of York, my first words must be to declare my allegiance to him. This I do with all my heart. You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne. But I want you to understand that in making up my mind, I did not forget the country or the empire, which as Prince of Wales and lately as King, I have for 25 years tried to serve. But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. And I want you to know that the decision I have made has been mine, and mine alone. This was a thing I had to judge entirely for myself. The other person most nearly concerned has tried up to the last minute to persuade me to take a different course. I have made this the most serious decision of my life, only upon the single thought of what would, in the end, be best for all. This decision has been made less difficult to me by the sure knowledge that my brother, with his long training in the public affairs of this country, and with his fine qualities, will be able to take my place forthwith without interruption or injury to the life and progress of the empire. And he has one matchless blessing, enjoyed by so many of you, and not bestowed on me, a happy home with his wife and children. During these hard days, I have been comforted by Her Majesty, my mother, and by my family. The ministers of the Crown, and in particular, Mr. Baldwin, the Prime Minister, have always treated me with full consideration. There has never been any constitutional difference between me and them, and between me and Parliament. Bred in the constitutional tradition by my father, I should never have allowed any such issue to arise. Ever since I was Prince of Wales, and later on when I occupied the throne, I have been treated with the greatest kindness by all classes of the people wherever I have lived or journeyed throughout the empire. For that, I am grateful. I now quit altogether public affairs, and I lay down my burden. It may be some time before I return to my native land, but I shall always follow the fortunes of the British race and empire with profound interest, and if at any time in the future I can be found of service to His Majesty in a private station, I will not fail. And now, we all have a new king. I wish him and you, his people, happiness and prosperity with all my heart. God bless you all. God save the king.
Edward Kennedy, speech at 1980 Democratic Party Convention. There were hard hours on our journey, and often we sailed against the wind. But always we kept our rudder true, and there were so many of you who stayed the course and shared our hope. You gave your help, but even more, you gave your hearts. Because of you, this has been a happy campaign. You welcomed Joan, me, and our family into your homes and neighborhoods, your churches, your campuses, your union halls. When I think back of all the miles and all the months and all the memories, I think of you. I recall the poet's words, and I say, what golden friends I have. Among you, my golden friends across the land, I have listened and learned. I have listened to Kenny Dubois, a glassblower from Charleston, West Virginia, who has 10 children to support but has lost his job after 35 years, just 3 years short of qualifying for his pension. I have listened to the grandmother in East Oakland who no longer has a phone to call her grandchildren because she gave it up to pay the rent on her small apartment. I have listened to young workers out of work, to students without tuition for college, and to families without the chance to own a home. I have seen the closed factories and the stalled assembly lines of Anderson, Indiana, and Southgate, California, and I have seen too many, far too many idle men and women desperate to work. I have seen too many, far too many working families desperate to protect the value of their wages from the ravages of inflation. Yet I have also sensed a yearning for new hope among the people in every state where I have been. And I have felt it in their handshakes. I saw it in their faces. And I shall never forget the mothers who carried children to our rallies. I shall always remember the elderly who have lived in an America of high purpose and who believe that it can all happen again. Tonight, in their name, I have come here to speak for them, and for their sake, I ask you to stand with them. On their behalf, I ask you to restate and reaffirm the timeless truth of our party. I congratulate President Carter on his victory here. I am confident that the Democratic Party will reunite on the basis of democratic principles, and that together we will march towards a Democratic victory in 1980. And someday, long after this convention, long after the signs come down, and the crowds stop cheering, and the bands stop playing, may it be said of our campaign that we kept the faith. May it be said of our party in 1980 that we found our faith again. And may it be said of us, both in dark passages and in bright days, in the words of Tennyson that my brothers quoted and loved, and that have special meaning for me now: I am a part of all that I have met. Though much is taken, much abides. That which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. For me, a few hours ago, this campaign came to an end. For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die. Abraham Lincoln, Second Inaugural Address. Fellow countrymen, at this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. Then a statement, somewhat in detail, of a course to be pursued seemed fitting and proper. Now at the expiration of 4 years, during which public declarations have been constantly called forth on every point and phase of the great contest which still absorbs the attention and engrosses the energies of the nation, little that is new could be presented. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the public as to myself, and it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all. With high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to it is ventured. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men would dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.